To a lot of people, The Lost Boys is just that Kiefer Sutherland vampire flick from the 80s. But to many others, it's a staple of not just horror films, but 80s culture in general. The clothes, the hair, the music, the charm, but also the sense of fun and adventure amongst the terror. These are just some of the things that make The Lost Boys one of the best vampire flicks ever made, and an unforgettable classic. And it really seemed to be a jumping off point for later vampire hits like Twilight and True Blood. The Lost Boys was an original script brought from first-time screenwriters Janice Fisher and James Jeremias, who modeled the film on the recent Richard Donner hit The Goonies. Since Donner was set to direct The Lost Boys, this made perfect sense. The characters, including the vampires, were all set to be much younger, in order to keep the more childlike tone of The Goonies. When Donner got caught up in other projects, Joel Schumacher swooped in to replace him. Schumacher's vision was more mature. In short, he wanted a sexier film. This meant the ages of the characters were bumped up. What is it about this movie that keeps fans coming back for more year after year? Well, besides this guy, I think it's the film's remarkable ability to balance the horror of blood-sucking vampires with the charm and comedy of the other characters. The film is light and fun, but also deadly serious. And everyone also has remarkable chemistry. Sam and Michael seem perfectly suited as brothers in two different headspaces. And the way Schumacher portrays Michael's transformation into a vampire is quite clever, using a more abstract filmmaking style with dissolves in order to create a trippy atmosphere. This is quite different than other monster transformation films, which were more unambiguous and graphic when it came to portraying such a violent process. Schumacher's sexy mandate is a major element in the film's success. Teeming beneath the horror and charm is a kind of glamorous vibe. A major part of this are the Lost Boys themselves. They look more like 80s fashion models than blood-sucking monsters. There is something magnetic about their personalities and sense of style. Kiefer Sutherland in particular is remarkable as David, and considering the fact that he has very few lines, he leaves quite the impression. He has the appropriate amount of menace, while still maintaining a kind of poise and stature. You almost want to get to know him better. And that hair.
And Billy Idol had just come out. He'd been with Generation X, I think, before that, but his first solo record had just come out, and he looked cool. I mean, he just looked badass. And so I thought, well, he's got white hair. That could look really cool. But Joel wanted my hair long. And so I actually think I might have been responsible, or at least partially responsible, for creating the mullet, and for that I'll apologize to the death.
But the film never forgets it's a vampire flick, and what was a more subtle impressionistic portrayal of killing earlier in the film becomes an unrelenting bloodbath of carnage later on in the second half. You can still see traces of the Goonies-esque idea with the younger characters, and putting them in harm's way is very effective. The Lost Boys is one of the few movies to feature the two Coreys, Corey Feldman and Corey Haim, two young staples of 80s film and pop culture who rose to prominence together and are one of the many highlights of this movie. Their considerable chemistry comes across very well, and one has to wonder what this movie would have been like with Richard Donner directing the Goonies-like spin-off the original draft promised. Perhaps the film would have been even scarier, since children are an effective means of creating empathy and suspense in the audience, because of how much more vulnerable they are. There is also an innocence to children that makes the sense of discovery and adventure much more potent. Imagine the Goonies with adults, and it becomes a lot less effective. As it stands, the Schumacher mandate of a more adult, mature vampire movie, mixed with a more childlike discovery and adventure theme, was probably the best way to go, as it's the best of both worlds. And it also creates an interesting thematic idea of the rites of passage, from childhood to adulthood. The script describes Michael as being in his late teens, and the film is very clear about this situation when it comes to being accepted by the vampires. He is tested, tempted, and while he does drink from the bottle of blood, starting his transformation into an undead, he is hesitant to join his new fraternity in the murder and mayhem they gleefully participate in. Peer pressure is a very real thing, and part of becoming an adult is figuring things out for yourself. In that sense, The Lost Boys is a fascinating parable about the struggles of looming adulthood. The Lost Boys is one of those rare horror flicks that remains on best of lists year after year after year, It's also an excellent example of amazing filmmaking and a prime example of how to balance comedy, horror, adventure, and strong thematic ideas. If you enjoyed this video, consider hitting the like and subscribe button, as I'll be posting more content in the future. Thanks for watching.